Hey, this is Coach Jaden. Today we're going to be talking about our strike principles for sticks and blades. In FMA, a lot of the practices that they do, they're either stick, a blade, it could be a knife, it could be a sword. They have different types of blades that they use. But when they're practicing, a lot of their techniques transfer from one form to another, including empty hand. This here, though, we have about 9 different strike principles that we go through as we're holding a blade or stick. Could also apply to knife, and we're going to go over all 9. So our very first one, we're going to start with what's called a 4-finger grip. Four-finger grip, you see a lot of people, they start holding in different directions. Some people, or different lengths up and down the stick. Some systems will actually use this and go right up to the very tip. This prevents anybody from using that as a leverage point. There are other ones that go a little bit higher up. They get a little more speed, power from here, but it also shortens range. So a lot of these principles, or a lot of the ways that you hold it, do have advantages and disadvantages on what they're trying to accomplish, but it's a give and take. So whichever one you decide to use, it's totally up to you. In our system, we use what's called a 4-finger grip. Now, how we determine a 4-finger grip is if I'm holding with my non-dominant hand the edge of the stick right from here, that's 4 fingers. I'm going to come up right next to it like I'm holding a sword from here, and I'm going to let go. So I do have a little bit of this end point here. In FMA, they call it a puño, just the butt end of your weapon. From here, I can use it for striking, I can use it for trapping, but I'm going to have that open so I can use it rather than all the way up here. So it's about 4 fingers up. That's our strike principle number 1. Number 2, as we start moving up through our up through holding the weapon and how to strike, is called the 90-degree principle. Now, the 90-degree principle is how we actually hold the stick. So it's actually 2 different 90 degrees that we talk about. The first 90 degree is here, how we hold the stick. When we strike, we want to maintain this position from here, especially through our slashes. Now, that's going to change for thrusts, that may change for flicks when we come out, but we want to try to get that, especially for our slashes and our hacks, trying to keep our wrist 90 degrees. When I start going out this way, it does give me a little more reach, but it also opens up my body and my wrist to be attacked. So for this system, as we're practicing our slashes, we're going to try to keep this 90-degree principle from our chamber position all the way through, slashing up until we get to our second 90 degree, which is on our side. So as we're coming through, I like to think of this as like a fence. All right, my property, if I'm stepping across, I'm striking through. I'm exiting my property, striking, keeping that 90-degree principle. As soon as I enter my property again, at this 90 degree on my side, I can break the wrist and flow into my next chamber or next strike. So first 90 degree here. Second 90 degree is after my slash coming through. I can break the wrist so I can roll into my next chamber. Okay, so another reason why we do this is protection. Okay, like I was talking about before, how if I break the wrist, I can get struck here. If I were to reach out to my target, say for number 1 strike, I'm reaching out from here, I have from this position all the way to here, this much space that I am vulnerable. I don't have anything protecting me. So when I keep that 90-degree principle, I can slash, still coming through, all the way up until about here. So instead of this position, where I'm way up here, all the way down to here. So I have from this all the way down here to my chamber, and that's where I'm vulnerable, from here to here. Okay, so it's a lot shorter distance. So we're trying to stack to our advantage on how we can protect ourselves as we break through and slash through. Now, all this stuff happens in fractions of a second, but sometimes those fractions of a second can be your best friend. Right? Moving on. So that was our strike principle number 2. Going on to number 3. From here is our blade indexing. Now, we don't talk about this too much until we actually get into the blades, but blade indexing has to do with where or how we hold our blades from here and how we can tell where the edge of the blade is at. Now, you can't see this on a stick, obviously, because it's rounded, but when I'm striking, I'm going to practice this by imagining the blade is lined up with my 4 knuckles right from here. Not my punching knuckles that I usually do, but the next knuckles up. That's where my blade's going to be at. So some of my strikes, I'm going to come out. I'm going to be reaching out from here. Imagine I'm slashing through with these. And every single time I strike, I'm going to be mindful of where that blade's at, especially if it's on my body. If I were to turn that into myself and my knuckles are actually touching my body, that's almost me slicing myself. So I want to be very mindful of where I'm at and how I'm holding, especially through the strike. If I'm hitting here like this, my wrist is too far in, I'm literally hitting with the side of a blade or sword if I'm going to hit. So I want to try to get that good position coming out and indexing where my blade's going to be at from there. I got to move this to the side because this is moving all over the place. All right, next one is the striking surface. Now there's some drills from here that we actually go and focus on the center of our stick or our blade. That's more for calibration and control. When we get to calibration, I'll explain a little bit more from that, but it is definitely for a control purpose. Now we'll hit from here. This is where a lot of our strikes when we're at the close range happen, but for the most part, we're going to hit with that last third of our weapon. The reason being is range and distance, right? So we're going to get that good range out and keep our distance as we're slashing. There's a lot of techniques in sticks and blades that we will need to be just out of range so we can actually hit the arm or hit the wrist rather than hitting weapon to weapon. So just being right outside that range, being able to control, hitting with that top third of the weapon is going to be really beneficial to know where that's at. Which leads me into the next principle, which is our strike path and follow through. That is our 5th principle. Okay, so strike path. Strike path is essentially the path that your weapon takes to get to its target. Okay, so a lot of times what happens, especially for our slashes, okay, we're going to actually think about coming through. I'm going to use a slashing example. It's one of the easiest ones. When I go for my chamber position, I can imagine I'm entering into the neck with the hammer fist, but I have to go all the way through and follow through with the top part of my weapon so I can get to that top third, that strike surface to slash through. Okay, so again, coming in, it's like a hammer fist in and follow through from here. A lot of times what you're going to find is you'll see a lot of people do this. I hit on the neck, but then the rest of the weapon just kind of goes wonky all over the place. Okay, so I want to maintain a good strike path. Whatever the weapon path is, I'm going to follow that all the way through, trying to get a good slash, following through all the way through the tip, especially that last third. Okay, now obviously this changes for our thrusts, different type of thrusts that we do. It doesn't necessarily work for some of our flicks or fan strikes, but this is a really, really good way to practice all the way through, especially with following through with hacks or slashes. Okay, so that is our strike path and follow through. Number 6 we're going to talk about is our chambers. Now, every time we're in practice, especially if we're doing the standing or in the air or against, say, like a single strike, so it could be against a pole, something like that, against a pole or even against our teammates from that, we're going to try to utilize good chambers, right? Tight chambers wherever we're at. For this system right now, there's only a few chambers you need to know in the beginner levels, but we'll start building up from them, and there's a lot of different chambers that you can learn. But when we talk about chambers, on a chamber, again, that principle of having our property, that 90-degree principle, I'm on my property, I'm going to chamber all the way up rather than having this kind of lazy sort of chamber right up front here. Now, this doesn't mean that this doesn't work. In fact, in a live situation, you might opt for this type of position so you can fire out a lot faster rather than from up here. But in essence, you're trying to get full range of motion. Full range of motion allows you to get full power. From there, if you can do and practice that full range, you can start cutting it down and even going from up front, boom, and trying to get the same motion. But we're not quite there yet. So our strike principles are, we're going to use our chambers, start full range of motion. As you move up to the advanced levels, we'll start cutting it down, especially when you get that live situation, adaptation with a partner. You'll be able to switch it up, and you're gonna find you're gonna naturally do it anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. So always try to practice full range of motion all the way up through those chambers. Try to get all the way in if you can, depending on the type of chamber. Try to tap your weapon on the side so you can actually feel that physical tactile position, and whoop, I'm there, in. You could bounce it off there, that's fine. Doesn't have to be like a whack hitting yourself, but just a nice touch so you know, get that physicality, get that kind of like muscle memory of where it needs to come from there. All right, and those are our chambers. That's our strike principle number 6. Next principle is number 7, and that's our live hand or supporting hand. It's going to be our supporting hand. I mentioned this in some of our other drills. We're going to have that supporting hand in the beginner levels, just right here on our chest. The reason why is I don't want to be dead. I don't want to have a dead hand and just kind of leaving it from there. Now, obviously, in a fight, you might find yourself that maybe something happened, ligaments got cut, and or say your arm's dislocated and you can't use it as well. All right, you might have a dead arm, you might have a dead hand, but for principles of practice, we want to go from here, just keeping up to the chest. Later on, when you start moving into your combinations, you'll be using that and having a lot more live hand rather than a dead hand. So your supporting hand, we're always going to have up, up, and moving around, trying to cover in the areas that we might not be able to cover as we're following through from there. So that is strike principle number 7. A couple more. Last 2 principles have to do with how the rest of our body works, and that's body torque. So most every strike, with the exception of maybe a couple of them, like our flicks or fan strikes, is going to use some sort of body torque. We're going to be turning into the strikes. All right. Now this is common in most all martial arts. We utilize the waist turning back and forth, being able to strike, and striking here is no different. The only thing that's going to change is we're going to utilize a lot more of the wrist. So in FMA, they do a lot of twirls to build up momentum rather than trying to swing from way out here. They'll build up momentum right from here so they can move in, and that generates speed so they can go right into that strike, generating a little more momentum for that. All right, but we're going to implement that same thing with how our body turns into the strike, which leads us into our last principle, which is footwork. Now, when you're first starting out, you don't need to worry about the footwork so much, but the general idea is whatever side that I'm hitting with is usually going to be the side that's up front. I don't know if you can see from here, but if I were to hit on the opposite side, I'll put my leg up on here. If I were to hit my opposite side, okay, especially with a knife or a smaller weapon or a sword, if I were to come here, I might nick myself from here, especially if I'm tired. If I'm tired and I'm not having the best of form, because that's what's going to happen, your form is going to break down. You might hit and strike yourself rather than hitting your opponent, or you might hit your opponent and then come in, hit yourself. So in general, we try to keep the same side, same leg forward. That's not always going to be the case, but especially when you're starting out, I want you to really hammer down that footwork when you're ready for it, to try to strike for whatever side your chamber's on. That's the side that is going to be stepping forward or forward as you strike through, to kind of protect yourself from that. Okay, and those are our 9 strike principles. Again, these are just principles. It's not the end all be all. There are going to be situations where you're going to switch it up, and just like anything, so being able to adapt and use them, it's like you got to know the rules if you ever want to break the rules. But if you are going to break the rules, always have a purpose of why. Okay, there's always going to be a give and take, and no matter what you do, so be decisive about it. But practice these ones every time that you pick up your stick or your blade, and continue to practice hard. Again, these are not easy principles. This is something that even I practice to this day. A lot of practitioners will go through this every single time just to make sure that they have the right striking surface, right strike path, good accuracy, good body torque. Sometimes they forget it, they get lazy, and they just start running through. Right, being able to have something to focus on in your drills. So again, those are 9 principles, or 9 strike principles for your sticks and blades.